yielding back. Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if Michigan is the mitten state or the motor state. I'm confused on that, but
it's both.
okay. I want to applaud what is going on in South Carolina with BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes and what they're doing with the EVs along with other vehicle manufacturing. And I apologize for this sound, but I want to remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we're $31 trillion in debt and we're spending money that's borrowed. I say that because what is the role of government in subsidizing or funding these type things? I point to government spending on cash for clunkers. It was a failed program at the initial, on the onset, Obamacare rollout, the problems that it had. I believe in innovation at the private sector level. I think myself that we have more machinery of government than is necessary. Too many parasites living on the labor of the industrious. Government big enough to supply everything you need is big enough to take everything you have. The course of history shows that as the government grows, liberty decreases. That was a founding father, Thomas Jefferson, that quoted that. Liberty is the liberty to innovate and invent and capitalize off the profits of that innovation. I'm fascinated with AVs. I think the appropriate initial step is what I see happening in the trucking industry. Point-to-point delivery, oftentimes at night, with commodities, distribution center to distribution center, maybe local carriers. I think that is a way we can prove that AV works, AV is safe, and I love to see the innovation within the trucking industry as the future of AVs before we entrust that to the populace to get in an AV that maybe is driverless. I know we're not using that term in the future, but I do see that as the way for the future, both in trucking and passenger vehicles. So I want to shift gears a little bit. And Ms. Sachs, while the U.S. banned Huawei from building 5G infrastructure, Chinese state-owned automotive companies like AutoX and Pony AI continue to operate pilot programs in the United States with limited oversight. What types of information these companies collect that could pose a national security risk if shared with foreign adversaries that could exploit such information?
So AV companies collect many different kinds of data, and Mr. Farah might be able to comment in more depth on what that is. I'm not familiar with these specific companies. I can say more broadly from understanding, how the industry works from a data security standpoint. I think that there's not only potentially information about the infrastructure, the mapping, but I would also sort of push back and say, are they collecting information about mapping and streets that's any different from what you might find on Google Maps or that's available openly? So they're different kinds of data, and so one question might be what kinds of data are they collecting and who has access to it? And I would ask that not just for these particular companies of Chinese ownership, but any AV company more broadly, and what are the data security practices? The point that I've made in this hearing repeatedly is that we should focus on certain kinds of data have different levels of sensitivity, who has access to it, how is that being secured, rather than necessarily looking at a sort of country of origin or nationality when that data might be openly available on the commercial market in other forms.
Yeah, I think that's strong. I'm not concerned about this. I'm just stating this for the record. Uber already has, if I use an Uber to go to Walmart, they know how many times I went to Walmart or that I ate fast food. And who collects that information, how it's shared with others about my traveling habits, my shopping habits, my eating habits, and I think that's a concern of many Americans, what AVs will collect as you travel around. Mr. Farah, as a follow-up to that question, it's become abundantly clear that Chinese-owned companies are testing in the U.S. and sending information they collect back home. However, if the American company were to test their AVs in China, they would not be able to send that information back home. Is that correct?
Thank you very much for the question. First, want to note, thank you for the appreciation for AV trucking, which is a very exciting trend line in our industry. I think that market access overseas is a big concern, generally speaking, for our industry. We want to make sure that as these companies scale and grow, that they have access to those markets. And so my understanding is that's a huge consideration in a place like China, where we don't have that same level of reciprocity, and would certainly be happy to dialogue with you and your team further about that.
Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of hearings on this type stuff, and I look forward to that conversation. With that, I yield back.